Welcome everybody. If you're working on your art portfolio, you're going to love this interview with Clara Lieu from Rhode Island School of Design, one of the best schools out there. I get so many requests to look at your portfolio for this school, and so we're lucky to have a really great art professor who works there speaking with us today to tell us about how to prepare an art portfolio and some of the questions you might have when selecting a college as well, whether you're a parent or a student considering going into art and design. Clara's going to give us some really good insights today. So welcome, Clara, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Some people who are considering Rhode Island maybe already know about you, but there could be lots of people out there that don't know. You do have a fantastic art website, claralieu.com, and then you have a blog that you write regularly, and you write for the Huffington Post with Ask the Art Prof. And you've got some fantastic insights where you're answering all kinds of questions about art and how to make a portfolio, all those things. So it's so wonderful to hear from you today, Clara. So maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been working and teaching at Rhode Island, and maybe a little bit about your own education so that the students and their families kind of get a little idea of who you are and where you've been.
I actually started at RISD in 1993 when I attended the RISD pre-college program. So I was at RISD the summer of my junior year. I did that program, and then 2 years later I was accepted as an undergraduate student. So I spent a lot of time at RISD as an undergrad, but that RISD pre-college program really solidified a lot of things for me. You know, it was only a 6-week program, but I still consider that to be sort of a major milestone in my art career. After that, I took 4 years off and tried to work independently as an artist. And then I went back to graduate school at the New York Academy of Art in New York City. And then I got a teaching position at Concord Academy, which is a high school preparatory program. I taught at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts for 4 years. I taught at the Art Institute of Boston. I finally landed back at RISD in 2007, where I've been since then.
You seem so passionate about teaching, so much so that you write about it regularly, and your passion really shines through in your answers and how much you love working with students. Could you maybe share with me a little bit about why you chose to go into teaching, not just doing your art? So just kind of curious about that how you bring the passion for the arts into your teaching, or how the teaching comes into your art.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my studio practice and my teaching definitely inform and support each other. In other words, I could never really see a situation where I only had one and I didn't have the other. You know, people say to me all the time, oh, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to teach and, you know, you were independently wealthy, you could just work on your artwork all the time? And actually, my answer to them is, well, no, actually. I would much rather sustain my teaching practice with my studio practice at the same time, because the two of them are so critical to my identity as an artist. So I find that to be really important. And actually, the funny thing about teaching is I actually ended up in teaching by accident. It wasn't on purpose. When I was a RISD student doing my undergraduate degree, I used to teach at art camps in the summer for elementary school students. So when I got out of RISD, that was really the only sort of work experience that I had at that stage. So I thought, okay, well, I've taught art at the elementary school level, why don't I try to do that as a job? And then I ended up loving it so much that I never really kind of looked back. So it's kind of funny that I never really said, I'm going to be a teacher today. You know, I just sort of ended up doing it and ended up loving it passionately. So it's kind of fun the way things turned out.
Yeah, well, I love teaching too. I used to teach at Sheridan College, which is a really good arts college in Canada, in Ontario, and I just loved it so much. I love working with the students, and I love working at that high level where people are so the students are just so dedicated and happy to be there because it's hard to even get into some of these colleges. And so it's really exciting to work with those kinds of students. And today I work with students helping them follow their goals and dreams of going to their dream college. And it's so rewarding, especially working with young people. They're not certain if they can get in and if they're good enough, and they're kind of confused how to put a portfolio together. And then they're just so pleased when they get a little bit of insight on how to do that and develop some of their skills so they can really show their ideas and embark on a new period of their life. And so I absolutely agree with you. I love to still paint and draw and sculpt and design, but I just love working with students. So it's so nice to speak with somebody that isn't teaching just to try to support their art, but it's part of them. And I have found, like you, that I learn from teaching.
Oh, absolutely.
And I found there was a period of time when I was working at Sheridan and didn't really have as much time to paint as I thought I might.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to it some years later, and I was amazed my work had progressed, even though I hadn't been actually painting. It was because of working with those students all the time. You're still creating and processing in your mind, right? And so I found that I became a very strong artist and a strong instructor because of that experience, when I sort of started to bring it more together, where I was painting and teaching at the same time rather than one or the other. So it's kind of cool to hear somebody else saying that. The question I often get, I guess from students mostly, is, you know, where should I study?
Mm-hmm.
What should I study? And then how do I get into that school? How would you guide a student in selecting a career in the arts that's kind of right for them?
Mm-hmm.
And do you ever get that kind of question? I mean, normally you're assessing portfolios that are coming in for your program and judging whether they're going to be, you know, an appropriate student for your program and if your program is appropriate for them. But if you could talk to students early on when they're making that selection process, what would you tell them?
I think I would tell them to not worry about whether or not they think the subject they choose is going to make money in the future. Because I hear students voicing a lot of concern about, well, if I go into this major, it doesn't make a lot of money, and this one does. And I think it's not okay to assume that a given subject automatically makes money and that one automatically does not make money down the line. Because ultimately, what I find all artists do is that they pave their own paths. And you are sort of the one to decide whether or not you can make it a career or not. And I think I hear students say all the time, oh, well, I want to go into graphic design because I can make money with that later. And I'm going, well, you know, you might think that's the case, but what if you decide that you don't want to work very hard and you're not going to challenge yourself and you're not going to work at your practice? How are you going to make money then? You know, it doesn't matter what you're studying if you're being lazy about your studio practice. You know, and I've also had students say, oh, well, you know, I can't go into painting because that won't make a career for me later. And, you know, I say to them, you know, I know people who do it, so why shouldn't you be one of them, you know? So I think that the assumption that certain subjects are more profitable than others is really inaccurate and very off. So I tell the students, you know, you have to pursue what you're passionate about. You have to pursue what you really believe in, because if you're choosing something just for monetary reasons, then, you know, where's the passion?
Right. And, you know, I remember being one of those young students. Mm-hmm. I knew since I was 3 years old that I wanted to paint, and I loved art. And, you know, and I came from a family where we grew up on a farm, and the idea of going into the arts was very foreign to my parents, and they were worried about it. And I think there's probably a false idea that all artists starve. Right. I think you're right. It depends what you bring to it and the attitude you bring to it and how determined and disciplined you are to follow after your passion. So I chose to go into interior design because I thought it was somehow a mixture between architecture that I didn't think I was quite good enough in physics and mathematics to do it. So I chose instead, uh, maybe I should do commercial art. Then I thought, well, no, that would be painful because it's too close to art, but not art. So I decided on interior design because I thought I could do that. And I don't have to do grade 13 because at the time we had grade 13. And so being a young person, I was 18, I didn't really know. And that's what I chose to do. I did have a good career, and I did excel in it, and I loved it. But I have to tell you, my favorite class was the drawing class. I had this fantastic sort of hippie-type artist who didn't belong in any other way in that interior design department, but she was so passionate, and I learned so much from her. And I remember saying to her, I think it was second semester of my first year, and I said, I don't know if I should be doing this. Like, I want to be an artist. Do you think I could ever be an artist? And she said, yes, if that's what you are in your heart and soul, then you are, and you will do it, and you'll be okay. And I hear from so many people, whether they're in animation or architecture or painting or printmaking or graphics, you have to be passionate and you have to love it. And you know what's interesting? I did have a good career in design, and I'm glad that I did what I did. I got some good skills that certainly have served me well in my life, but I wasn't ultimately happy, and I left a fantastic job in Toronto. My parents thought, you're nuts. I was designing buildings all over the world for Cadillac Fairview, a big developer here in Canada, and I wasn't happy because really I'm a fine artist. So I went back to school to study my fine art degree and studied in Europe, in Italy and Paris, and ultimately I think you need to do that. And there's so many mature students that I help that they're doing something else, they're not happy, they're getting depressed, they're either trying to do something that they feel they can make a living at or that their parents want them to do, and they realize, no, I really got to go for this. And a lot of times those are the students that come to me and say, can you help me because I got to change my life, I need to learn how to draw, and I need to get in. So that brings me to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, is the importance of learning how to draw. And one of the things when you're talking about portfolios, if you go to your blog or any of your entries in the Huffington Post, you talk a little bit about portfolio. And I remember reading that you said you thought it was really important in a student portfolio to see drawing that was done by hand rather than from photograph. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on that, of why you feel that that's so important.
Well, I think drawing from life, if I were to describe it, drawing from life is an experience. In other words, when you draw something from direct observation, it forces you to really engage with the subject in a way that a photograph does not. For example, I was just in the nature lab last week at RISD, where they have all sorts of incredible specimens from nature that students can observe and they can draw, and I just love the sort of ambiance of that room. There's something about all of the activity and all of the specimens that are in there, and just getting into that room alone is such an experience. The way it smells, the sounds that are in that room, those are the kinds of things that you will not get from a photograph. You'll never know what your subject smelled like. You'll never know what your subject looked like from the other side. You won't be able to touch it. You won't be able to stand on top of it, look at it from a different point of view. There's just so much you miss out on when you're drawing from a photograph. And I think that a lot of drawing is learning how to see. A lot of people say, oh, well, drawing's just about, what you do with your hand and what physically your hand is doing. But actually, I think more than half of drawing is really learning how to visually investigate something in a very deep way. And the only way you can truly be a part of that process is to observe something in real life. Because a photograph just does not offer even remotely that kind of experience. There's other things. For example, a photograph is flat, so if you're trying to make something look three-dimensional from something that's already flat, that seems like a really big contradiction that doesn't really work out very well. a photograph is already edited for you. There are compositional choices that have already been made that are not your own. So I think that for those reasons, that's why I argue really working from life. Working from life is harder, it's a lot more challenging, and it really gets you to sort of process things in a different way. And working from a photograph is so much easier, but it's a really sort of bad shortcut that I see a lot of people doing that really doesn't help you in the end. In fact, what it does is it gets you to develop a lot of really bad habits in your drawing skills, which I think are very difficult to kind of undo at a later stage. So I really tell students, you know, if you want to get ahead in the game, draw from life. Skip the photographs altogether. There will be a time and a place for that, but right now is not that time.
That sounds like good advice. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I know that some people, when they're starting to learn to draw, they might start with 2D to 2D and then progressed from 3D drawing. Although I suppose that, you know, you have an interesting idea there that you can get into some bad habits by going from photograph first. And so it sounds like one of the things you look for when you're assessing portfolios is to see the artist's own vision of how they composed it, and looking for evidence that it was drawn from 3D and that they're making that decision and they have that understanding of how to convert 3D into an artwork where they're connecting with their subject somehow. I wonder if it alludes to a bit to get a sense of who the artist is and how they see. I know, like, for example, one of the schools in Canada, Carleton, they have some interesting ideas on their website where they talk about portfolio, like what is seeing, what is drawing. They kind of get into the philosophy of how you connect to the world around you. So when you're assessing students for your school, are you not just looking for skill, like can they draw, but how do they see the world? Who are they? What are their ideas? Because one of the things I often tell students, yes, you have to show that you have some basic ability that you'll be able to make it in that program, but more than that, you want to show how you think, how you design, what ideas you have, and that you have original ideas that really are expressing something that's unique about you. Do you find that you can even tell that, even from a drawn from life drawing compared to some kind of interpretation from a photograph?
I think you can tell the difference. I think that what I would be looking for in assessing someone's portfolio is how is the student interpreting something? What are they telling me about their subject that is unique to their own personal vision? So in other words, you could be drawing an image of a pine cone, and maybe somebody draws it, just sort of copies it technically, and it looks just like a pine cone, and it's technically accomplished, but doesn't really do more than that. In other words, it's kind of like a descriptive drawing that just says, okay, well, the pine cone is this tall, it's this wide, it has these little sections over here. What I'm looking for is someone who tells me what they think of the pine cone. Do they hate the pine cone? Do they love it? Do they think it's a beautiful form? Do they think it's a frightening form? I want to hear the op-ed piece. I want to hear what they think of that pine cone, and I want to see that opinion somehow expressed visually through the way the drawing has been made. So I think that absolutely you can get opinions out of even the most simple things. For example, one artist I like to reference quite a bit is Claude Monet. He took the subject of a haystack, which for me is just about the most boring subject you could come up with that's out there. I mean, really, what's so fascinating about a haystack when you think about it? But, he wasn't really talking about the haystack. He was talking about light. He was talking about color. And the haystack was his vehicle for discussing those sort of larger concepts in his work. So I do believe that at any subject or any level, some of that can be communicated. And, you know, you don't need something big and flashy in order to have an opinion on something.
Yeah, and I, you know, I have to say I love those paintings of Monet of the haystacks. Not because I love haystacks, but the color is just phenomenal in how he can make something, an everyday object, just so compelling and beautiful to look at. And that, I guess that was an unusual thing at the time to look both the way they painted with the color and the impression of what they got from the scene, but also to look at some of those everyday things in that regard. But it kind of brings up another thing that I had wanted to talk to you about today, is that the balance in a portfolio, that I get the feeling from a lot of students that they really think they have to show off how good they are, how good their skills are. And that we see in a lot of high school students too that they're looking maybe and oftentimes a little conventionally at objects, like you said, like the pine cone, making it look really good. And it's great to have that skill, but it doesn't really show you who the artist is and what they're really made of and what their potential is, to work with their ideas and the way they see the world. So that I'm wondering from you if you could give us an idea when you're assessing a portfolio, how much weight is put on the sort of the skill level of a student, of the different types of things they're able to do, versus that creative input, the way they see the world, like you said, whether they love pine cones or hate them, or what they're going to say with whatever object they're looking at and connecting to. So, because I think that's one of the things I find I have to keep reiterating to students and encouraging them to do, is to explore who they are and what their ideas are, not just to come across thinking they have to show all these various skills. Could you comment more on that and the kinds of things you look for in portfolios?
Well, I'm looking for the relationship between technique and concept. And I want to see in the individual pieces that the technique and concept are interacting with each other and that they have a symbiotic relationship. In other words, that you cannot have one without the other. In other words, I don't think it's a good idea, for example, to separate, okay, well, here are my technically accomplished drawings, here are my conceptual drawings, and they sort of, you know, coexist peacefully. You know, I want them to be fully integrated so that there's something about maybe the way you're using the material technically that supports the idea or the concept that you're trying to get across. So I want to see that they really have a relationship, that they work together, because I think oftentimes people treat them separately, and I don't think that's such a great idea. I think merging them into, you know, a more sort of cohesive whole, I would say, is more the way to go.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, and I do encourage students to try to address all of the concerns of what you might put into a portfolio at one time, so that if you want to show that you might have a particular skill set, do it in a creative and compelling way that makes an impact and is memorable. So when you're assessing portfolios, what's the sort of mix that you look for at your school, and what program do you assess for? I mean, because it's certainly one of the things I noticed, there's always similarities from school to school or discipline to discipline. However, you know, there is a difference whether you're applying for fine art or you're applying for architecture.
Right.
So,
well, I don't sit on the
admissions. You can tell us more about what you look for and why.
Okay. I don't sit on the admissions committee, so technically I don't make decisions about that. But I mean, I can talk to you about what I would be looking for, you know, if
I see.
I mean, really, I'm looking for potential, and I'm looking for diversity. I want to see that a student is driven, that they have self-initiative to go out and to want to experiment and try a lot of different things. In other words, if I see a portfolio where it's like 20 self-portraits, that says to me something about somebody being, very narrow-minded and not wanting to try something different. I want to see that somebody really has a willingness to kind of try out a number of different ways of working, because I think at that stage in your career, it's important to be trying out a lot of different new things. Later on, let's say at the graduate level, the emphasis tends to be more on being focused, being very specific about what it is that you're doing. But I think at the undergraduate level, it's a really different kind of thing.
Oh yeah, one of the things I found interesting that you said in one of your Ask the Art Prof questions, you were encouraging students to have finished artworks, where it wasn't just the subject that's rendered or shaded or colored in, but that they treat the whole artwork, the whole surface, as an artwork, and thinking about what is the relationship to the background, and that too often you would see high school students just treating the subject. And I'm wondering if you could compare and contrast a bit why that's important to look at the whole artwork, but also how would that relate to, there's times that it's good to have in a portfolio some finished artworks, but also some of your idea generation process. So in those cases, would it really be appropriate to have all of the background considered as well? Do you like to see in portfolios maybe picking one project where the student might track their idea generation process from some research, sketchbook stuff, trying out some different ideas, and then culminating in the final project? I often, I know when I was at Sheridan that we'd like to see that, to get a sense of how people thought and worked through an idea. Is that something that you would recommend too? So just to fill us in a little bit about why you said you should have a finished artwork, and I thought if I read it correctly that you thought you should only have that. Would showing a concept be sort of an exception to that?
I mean, I don't think you can say that everything I say is necessarily set in stone, because I think that every single school has its own concerns that are very specific to what they need. So I think as far as finishing everything, I would check the school's requirements first and see what they say. My sort of tendency would be to say, err on having more finished pieces than unfinished pieces, because that really is sort of the meat of your portfolio, is those finished works. And I would only see those sort of in-progress pieces as being supplementary to those finished pieces in the portfolio. So I think it's sort of a case-by-case basis that you need to check the individual schools and see what they say. One of the reasons I do put an emphasis on finished work, though, is because I find that a lot of students at that stage in their careers don't have a lot of experience really following through on every aspect of the drawing. In other words, they'll have a very unbalanced set of skills. They'll be very good at drawing the subject. They can draw, the wrinkles in the skin really well in the portrait, but they've never drawn a background in their lives. And I think that makes for a skill set which is not very well-rounded, and you really want to be addressing all those different things. Like, for example, I say to students all the time that every square inch of your image matters. It's like I had a music teacher, a piano teacher, when I was studying as a child. She used to say to me all the time, you have to make every single note special. And I always thought it was so ridiculous because, when you're playing a piano piece, there's a lot of notes, so how could you possibly make every single note special? But it's more a mindset. It's like to say to yourself, well, this matters too. The background contributes to the art piece as much as the portrait does. So same thing, it goes back to relationships and things informing and supporting each other. So I just find that a lot of students have never worked on a background before. A lot of students are used to just leaving things blank. And they end up with these drawings that are just really unbalanced because you have sections that are totally neglected, not looked at or addressed at all, and then other sections that have been worked on like crazy, you know? So I think it's more about bringing a balance to their work so that things are, you know, a little bit more well-rounded in the end.
I think you've answered a lot of the questions that I had for you from things that I've read about your writing. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why it is that you write this blog and why you chose to work with Huffington Post with this feature, Ask the Art Prof. If you could expand on that just a little bit, I think that would be really interesting to hear about.
Well, you know, I think actually my blog started a really long time ago. It's just I didn't start Ask the Art Professor until I believe it was March 2013. So Ask the Art Professor has only really been around for a few months or so. But my blog covers as well my own studio practice. And for me, the reason I started doing it was sort of a motivational part of my practice. In other words, if I had to verbalize what it was I was doing with my artwork, if I had to write it down on paper somehow, for me it just made things more concrete. I felt that I could track my progress. I could understand better what I was doing 2 months ago, what I was doing a year ago even, and it just really keeps me on track. You know, it's just sort of this routine that I fall back on. So you know, if I haven't blogged in 2 days, I start saying to myself, oh my God, I haven't done anything, I need to get back on top of it. And so it's just a way to kind of motivate myself all the time. Ask the Art Professor came about because, to be honest, I had a lot of sort of shifts between my work schedule and my home schedule, and I found myself with a particular schedule where I had a lot of downtime at home, but I couldn't go to the studio. And so I wanted to find something that I could do that would stimulate my mind, that would deal somehow with my art practice and my teaching, and writing turned out to be the thing. And I never thought about myself as a writer. You know, in high school, I guess I did okay. I took honors English and stuff like that, but I never really thought about myself as a writer. It occurred to me that I don't like academic writing. In other words, I don't want to write essays about theory and things like that to be published in journals. I like writing that's more conversational, that's broader, that brings in all sorts of different kinds of voices, which I guess is where Huffington Post came along, because that is kind of the tone of their newspaper, that it does have a broad reach, it's conversational, and it's not intended to be theoretical or preachy or anything like that. So it's been really fun for me. I've been having a blast doing it. It's been very exciting to work on.
Well, I've enjoyed reading from both your blog and the articles at Huffington Post, and my wonderful assistant Christopher has learned so much from you, and that's why he reached out to you. I think I have to thank you for educating him more fully in what we do at PortPrep, because I think he got some of his insights from your writing, and so I'm sure a lot of other students do too, and perhaps even some art teachers out there. So I think it's a great thing that you're doing. Are you planning to do any other writing, any books or things of that nature?
Well, I did publish my first book in August, and that book is called Learn, Create, and Teach, A Guide to Building a Creative Life. That was my first sort of big writing project. I'm hoping that I'll have another one on the horizon pretty soon, although I've become so busy with my blog projects that it's sort of been pushed aside temporarily. But I do hope at some point to be able to publish again.
Well, that would be great, and we would love to have it on our website somehow. We do have an Amazon store. I don't know if you're going to publish that way or some other way, but we would love to be able to share that with our students and their families. And yeah, I know it being about writing books. We're working on some books too, and one of them is this thing that you alluded to earlier about choosing a career in the arts and that whole thought process and challenging some of the beliefs around arts careers as well. it might be nice to talk to you more about that, maybe to get some ideas for some of the content in there. I think you had some really insightful ideas about having an arts career. So yeah, that's one of our ebooks we're looking at. And then, of course, we're putting a book together just to help people in how to put a portfolio together and all the considerations around that. And it's always a challenge to find that time to write, and while we're working with students in our website too. Yeah, it's a job. So in closing, I'm just wondering if you have any special advice that you would give a student who's looking to get into the arts, or for their families, because I do find one of the friction points is that parents are often concerned for their child in selecting a career in the arts, and you were sort of talking about that earlier, about what does it take to be successful in the arts. I'm just wondering if there's something that you've come across in your career where you say, this is this little gem I'd really like to share with students or their families about having a career in the arts and studying the arts.
Well, I think what's unique about the arts, and I think this is probably what makes a lot of people nervous about choosing a career in the arts, is that there is no set path. In other words, I have a friend who's a lawyer, and so he decided in undergraduate that he was going to be a lawyer. And so, okay, of course, he goes to law school, he takes the bar exam, he gets into a practice. It's pretty obvious what you need to do to become a lawyer. It's not like there's some other alternative version of the bar exam that you're going to take. And, being a doctor is kind of similar. You go to medical school, you do residency, you do a fellowship, you establish your own practice. So I think the arts are so different in that there is no medical residency. There is no bar exam. There's nothing that is sort of determined for you. So I guess what I would tell students is that at any stage in their career, whether you're a student, whether you're a professional, whether you're a teacher, you really have to take the self-initiative to empower yourself to do things. And you have to tell yourself that you need to be the one to make those decisions, not someone else. And I think a lot of students, they say to themselves, oh, well, I'm just a student, I don't have a lot of experience, or, oh, well, I'm not there yet, or I can't do this because I don't have that. Don't think about that. Think about what you have. What do you have today? What could you do today to somehow contribute to what that is that you want to be doing? And maybe sometimes that's going to the studio and working for 3 hours. Sometimes it's working on your website for a little bit of time. Other times it's having lunch with a colleague so you can have some kind of artistic conversation together. And if you can make that happen, I think things can work for you.
Thank you so much for sharing so many great ideas and insights.
You're welcome.
I think this is just going to be so helpful to people. Is there anything that you want to share about your own work, or any resources that you have that students should know about?
Let me think. I mean, it's tough because there's so much on the internet, and it's so difficult to sort of sift through. I guess the one piece of advice I would give in terms of choosing a program, choosing a school, would be to get online and see examples of the student work that is being made at the school at the time. For example, RISD has a website called RISD Portfolios, which features portfolios by alumni, faculty, and students. So if you get on RISD Portfolios, you can look at portfolios that are being made right now by current students. And that's really a great way to gauge whether or not you think that program is appropriate for you. I know freshmen at RISD do that all the time when they're picking their majors. They get online and they look at those images to see what kind of student work is being made. So that's one thing about applying to art school that, for example, I didn't have when I was growing up. We didn't have the internet, and so we couldn't get online and look at all these images. And so now we have this incredible exposure to all of these images, and I think that it's just a great thing, so use it.
Yeah, it's great that your school has that. A lot of them don't. And so that one way to check is to go to the school and see what's being done there. And I
Right.
think that, checking out who are the professors and what are the students like and what are they producing, and is that what you see yourself doing? Like, what are you looking for? Because it's something I was just talking to a recent grad from Ontario College of Art, well, before they changed into OCAD-U, and she was saying for her, she said even though it was a school that had a fantastic reputation, she found it was almost too open in how they created. And I hear this occasionally from some schools, like you have to figure out what's right for you. Are
Right.
you a person who wants a really open-ended, creative environment, or are you somebody who says, well, I want instruction? You really need to look a little more deeply into not just what's the name of the school and whether it has a great reputation or not. I mean, that is important, but more is it the experience that's going to be right for you and the way you learn? So one way to tell is to go in a more in-depth kind of campus tour where you could maybe visit and talk with a professor or some students, go sit in on class if it could be arranged. And it's a great thing, like what you say, what your school has is that you can actually see work that's being produced now.
Right.
So that's a great thing. So we'll make sure that we add a link in there so that students can find that and go and look for that. And as much as possible, see if whatever school they're considering might have something like that, or go to an open house so that you know what's
Right.
being produced there. Yeah. So thanks so much for your time today, Clara.
Oh,
It's
thank
been
you.
really insightful. And and people can find you at claralieu.com, and the
Yep.
Huffington Post Ask the Art Professor. Any way else that you'd want to connect with students?
I would just invite people to send me emails. If you have concerns, if you have questions that you'd like to post to my column, I'm always looking for great topics. So just shoot me an email. I'm happy to hear about what you want to know about.
Okay, so how do they reach you, Clara?
Clara at claralieu.com.
Okay, and we'll make sure we have a link there with the video so they can find you easily. Well, thanks
Great.
so much today, and good luck there at Rhode Island, and I wonder if any of the students that have come by my way will be meeting you next year, perhaps.
It's a small world, isn't it?
You never know. Yes. Thanks so much, Clara.